Ladies and gentlemen, we have liftoff. GameStop has officially adopted Bitcoin. It has actually happened. And they are now looking at a $26 billion opportunity for their shareholders. And we could be looking at a mania even greater than the 2021 GameStop craze. This is what we're looking at here. GameStop on March 25th, 2025, announced that its board has unanimously approved an update to its investment policy to add Bitcoin as a treasury asset. So in this video, we're going to talk about how you can profit off of this craziness with GameStop and Bitcoin. We're going to talk about what's the future for GameStop stock now, and of course we're going to talk about the future and implications on Bitcoin. So without further ado, let's talk about the story here. Right now, obviously Michael Saylor has been meeting with GameStop CEO and board members over recent weeks and months. It's been highly speculated this would happen, and it seems that it definitely has happened now. And my full expectation is that they're going to go really hard into this strategy. So let's talk about the specific numbers here. This is a $26 billion opportunity. This could flow tens of billions, at least $10 billion into Bitcoin, both from first order and second order effects. And perhaps most importantly, this is going to be a massive media craze for retail, probably in the second half of 2025, but potentially even out beyond that. So let's go through some facts. Fact one, GameStop has a market capitalization around $11 to $11.5 billion. GameStop shares are already up overnight. Probably by the time you're watching this, GameStop is already at $11.5 billion worth as a company. For context, that is about 1/20th the total market cap of McDonald's, and that is about 1/8 or so of the market cap of MicroStrategy, now known as Strategy, just for some context of anchoring how much money that actually is. $4.8 billion is what they have in cash. This has been something that GameStop shareholders have been pounding the table on for a very long time. Now, oh, GameStop's getting more cash, you're getting more cash. Well, now it's even a stronger narrative because I'm assuming they're going to deploy the vast majority, if not the entirety, of that cash position into Bitcoin. By the way, that is a massive amount of cash. Okay, look at that. Think about that. They have $11 billion market cap, and they have almost half of that in cash, right? This means that, despite GameStop stock being down since 2021, they still remain roughly in the top 1,500 most valuable companies on the planet, right? So keep in mind, for everything we're about to lay out through the remainder of this video, there are 1,500 companies that have the potential to buy more Bitcoin than GameStop potentially, right? This is how stupid early you are to Bitcoin, right? We'll get to that more in just a moment, right? So obviously everybody remembers the infamous GameStop squeeze in January 2021. I'm not going to rehash that story. You almost certainly know what that story is. So let us assume that the idea here of the CEO and the board of GameStop, let's assume, right, and this is assumption, right? Let's assume their goal is, let's pump the stock. We like the stock, right? Let's assume that's the goal. With that assumption, which I think is very reasonable, let's assume that they want to stack as much Bitcoin as possible, both with their cash treasury balance sheet, as well as issuing all kinds of new securities for the sake of buying more Bitcoin. Probably, since they're meeting with Michael Saylor directly, probably they're going to explicitly copy him, and probably they're going to stick to Bitcoin only. They're not going to go out to XRP, Ethereum. I hope they don't do that. I think that would undermine the entire narrative they're trying to do. So let's go through some math here based upon these assumptions. Assumption number one, we're going to assume that they deploy that $4.5 to $5 billion worth of cash on hand directly into Bitcoin. That's going to be the first thing we assume. The next thing I'm assuming is completely arbitrarily a number, just for an even number of 7 billion combined between the two numbers. But let's say they raise more capital, maybe via convertible notes, maybe through issuing new stock at the money issuance, from diluting their stock, whatever it is. Probably they're going to find new ways to acquire more Bitcoin once they convert the cash into Bitcoin. Remember, for context of Michael Saylor, this is exactly what he did back in 2021, 5 years ago now. Can't believe it's been 5 years. But his first buys for Bitcoin were with the cash on hand. He had $500 million worth of cash on hand. But remember, the vast majority of buys that Michael Saylor made were after the cash balance sheet were fully deployed. The vast majority of buys Michael Saylor has been able to make have been after that, right? It's been with diluting his stock and issuing new kinds of securities and debt for the sake of buying Bitcoin. So while this is a speculation, and I have absolutely nothing tangible to back this up, I do think it is totally reasonable that GameStop will be able to raise around half, at least half, of their current cash balance sheet to buy Bitcoin, right? Every single time Michael Saylor issues a new security to investors, fixed income investors or whatever, he's oversubscribed, right? Well, GameStop now is going to be a new friendly competitor with Michael Saylor, offering their new debt products or their new issuance, right? So I think if you want to be exceedingly bullish, you could argue that GameStop is going to raise at least $5 billion worth of cash in the, coming, let's say, 6 to 18 months for the sake of buying Bitcoin. So trying to be a little more realistic here because we don't yet have anything to back this up. Let's assume theoretically they were to acquire $2.2 billion worth of Bitcoin additionally besides their balance sheet. That is a total of about $7 billion for those doing the math at home. And of course, they're not going to be able to buy all that Bitcoin at the current price point. Now, some people would argue that, hey, the tariffs and recession, blah, 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 it's going to force Bitcoin price down, or at least it's going to be sidelined for a very long period here in the rest of 2025. Personally, that's not an opinion I have. And actually, again, I think it would be more bullish for GameStop stock if Bitcoin does go down or stay flat for the rest of 2025. Because, of course, the more flat it stays or the farther down it goes, the more Bitcoin GameStop could buy. So as much as this might sound a little absurd to people to have these three assumptions, I think it is totally reasonable, right? I think we are sandbagging the $2.2 billion of extra capital raised to buy Bitcoin. And I think potentially, if Bitcoin does stay flat or go down, maybe even this average cost basis is too high. But I'm more bullish than bearish on Bitcoin, so I think it's going to go up over the course of the next 6 months and not down. And so, of course, I'm going to assume that the average cost basis for GameStop is going to be significantly higher than today. At Bitcoin's current price oscillating between $80,000 to $90,000, this means roughly at least a 50% increase in the total cost of Bitcoin to be able to buy, right? So let's take those assumptions, $7 billion worth of Bitcoin, buying Bitcoin at an average cost basis of $120,000, ranging from, let's say, $90,000 to $150,000 or so of a Bitcoin price. That results in 58,333 Bitcoin. Okay, that is a lot of Bitcoin. Okay, for context, that is close to triple Coinbase's Bitcoin stack plus Tesla's Bitcoin stack, right? Tesla's got about 11,000, I think. Coinbase is about 9,000. Combine that together, that's just under 20,000 coins, more or less, give or take a couple thousand. That's about 3 times the total stack of Tesla and Coinbase, right? Of course, they've not bought these Bitcoin yet. I want to make that very clear. They've adopted Bitcoin on paper. They've not yet started buying Bitcoin, but theoretically, even with, in my opinion, more conservative amounts of capital raising, and even with a more conservative average cost basis for GameStop, we're still looking at a stack size triple that of Elon and Coinbase, right? A lot of people I know, but especially used to know, would gamble in Coinbase stock. Well, Bitcoin's too risky. I'm going to invest in the company that is for all the cryptos, right? I'm going to invest in Coinbase because I'm smart. Well, it turned out they weren't that smart, right? Because they were gambling in a gamble of an altcoin casino, which is gambling in itself, right? So my point is that as much as the narrative behind Coinbase is, oh, bullish Coinbase, as much as people are bullish behind Tesla stock, the reality is that GameStop, this tiny little company that everybody thought has been dead for the last 4 years, potentially could have a massive comeback story here. And I think that's exactly what they're trying to do, right? Now, again, if we're assuming that Bitcoin price is going to go up and we're assuming an average cost basis of about 120 grand per Bitcoin, that means that some Bitcoins will be bought below 120 grand and some Bitcoins will be bought above 120 grand. So let's assume that that's $150,000 worth of Bitcoin at the end of this accumulation massive accumulation period where they've acquired 58,000 Bitcoin. So let's, again, take the assumption of $150,000 a coin, right? Obviously, we're not there yet in Bitcoin price. That's roughly a doubling of Bitcoin price from today. But again, if that doesn't happen, I think that's actually more bullish because that means they're buying more than 58,000 coins. So let's be a little more conservative. Let's assume Bitcoin price runs. Let's assume GameStop only gets 58,000 coins. That is still 8.75 billion of Bitcoin worth held on their balance sheet. That's a massive, tremendous amount. That is the majority of their entire market capitalization today, right? And if we assume a reasonable 3x premium for their company compared to Bitcoin, which is something similar to MicroStrategy, right? Obviously, when MicroStrategy is down a lot, it's closer to a 1 to a 1.8 premium. When it's really heavily overvalued or in a short-term bubble, we're looking at something of like a 2.5 to 3.5x premium. Keep in mind, though, in the previous bull market, at the blow-off top of 2021, at MicroStrategy's blow-off top, it had a 6x premium. That's something a lot of people are forgetting. Is that possible? Maybe, maybe not. But let's, for the sake of assumptions, assume GameStop is reasonably valued at the same kind of premium that MicroStrategy is valued at. That's a 3x premium. That is $26.3 billion worth of Bitcoin for GameStop. This is what I mean when I say that GameStop has a $26 billion opportunity now sitting on their lap, right? This is what I literally mean, right? Even with assuming Bitcoin price doubles from here, and they're buying up on that run, they don't get super cheap Bitcoin, even assuming that, and assuming that they are 10 times less effective at raising new capital than Michael Saylor, even though they have Michael Saylor in their corner, right? That's still a $26 billion Bitcoin treasury, a Bitcoin war chest, right? Effectively, they could increase their entire share value, their entire market capitalization by 2.3x, assuming not major dilution in their underlying share number of shares, right? That's still a doubling of their share price, right? That's about $60 per share, right? At the time of recording, the share price for GameStop's about $25 to $26. It depends what the market open is and how crazy the volatility is in the coming days, but it's roughly $25. And so if they were to do something in this approximation, if then statements, if Bitcoin is 150,000 and if they've acquired 58,333 Bitcoin, that's about $60 a share, assuming a 3x premium, right? But this is the crazy thing. I think that's just the beginning. I think it goes much further from there, right? If you combine the short squeeze narrative of all the retail holders that are already GameStop maxis that have been hodling their GameStop shares with diamond hands since 2021, right? If you combine that narrative with all the Bitcoin maxis that now are going to be smash buying GameStop shares. By the way, I will not be one of them. I'll get to that at the end of the video. But there will be people in Bitcoin that buy GameStop shares. And you combine that kind of retail excitement with all the people that are already excited about GameStop, enthusiasm, right? That's a massive combination of catalysts I think could send prices significantly higher, right? Could we potentially see a future where GameStop and MicroStrategy gap up and up and up, squeezing shorts, right? In the same way we saw with GameStop in 2021, right? I think it's totally possible. What happens if, let's say, the United States, let's say Howard Lutnick, Donald Trump, Elon Musk all come out and say, we're buying more Bitcoin, right? Elon Musk has been very silent on Bitcoin for years, right? Probably in large result due to the kinds of negative feedback he got from Dogecoin. I think Elon is being intentionally quiet when it comes to Bitcoin. So what were to happen to the price of GameStop and to the price of MicroStrategy if all of a sudden you have the world's richest man, the world's most powerful politician, the world's most powerful country, all buying Bitcoin, right? Yes, the strategic reserve has already come out, but they've not yet started announcing major Bitcoin buys in addition to what they already have. So if that were to happen, and if Bitcoin were to surge well beyond $150,000, not that I'm saying you should bet on it, but if it theoretically did, it's the kind of thing that this thing could just get completely out of control for people on the sidelines or for people shorting these kinds of stocks. So if, let's say, all these things happen and $60 is a quote-unquote justifiable share price for GameStop, let's say it's justifiable, right? 3x premium, they get about 60,000 coins, 50 to 60,000 coins or so, right? Let's say that's reasonable, but keep in mind, the mania top back in January of 2021 was in the $80 range. It was in the $80 range, right? $25.40 at the time at recording, right? If we look back to early 2021, we're looking at an $80, $50, $45, we're looking at something not too far higher than potentially what could be a reasonable mania top, right? In 2021, right? Like, to me, that's pretty crazy that perhaps the bottom, perhaps a justifiable number, is close to the mania top a few years ago, right? And so I think this is what GameStop is trying to do, right? I think this is what the CEO and the board is trying to do. I think they're trying to have a justifiable 2 to 3x increase in their balance sheet and their, stock price via Bitcoin. And I think that's how they're going to get all the retail sentiment back. I think it's how they're going to get the short squeezes back. And I think the most justifiable way for them to get a 5 to 10x increase in their share price is to justify a doubling or tripling of their share price, right? So I think the groundwork for massive media buzz around Bitcoin companies is coming. I don't think Michael Saylor is the last. I don't think GameStop is the last. I think we're going to see literally half a dozen, if not dozens, plural, of other companies out there, small market cap companies that realize, oh my gosh, there is no second best meme company. It's GameStop, right? We want to pump our own share price. Why don't we just adopt Bitcoin like crazy, right? And I think the second half of 2025 is going to get really crazy as we see these kinds of feedback loops begin, right? If you're a CEO of a quote-unquote zombie company that the market is shorting and nobody believes in, and you want to get excitement to your stock, convert from cash to Bitcoin, let the Bitcoin run, and pretty soon you have all kinds of demand flowing into your stock. With that premium flowing back into your stock, then you can dilute your stock shareholders, raise new debt to grow your business or to buy Bitcoin, right? So let's go through my personal 5 takeaways of what you should learn from this announcement and what we can predict going into the future here. Takeaway number 1, if GameStop does adopt Bitcoin, their share price, in my opinion, could easily triple or quadruple by the time Bitcoin price doubles, right? Bitcoin price doubling from today is approximately $150,000, $160,000, $170,000, right? I do think if GameStop does do these things, and it seems like to me every indication is they want to do these things, we could be looking at GameStop outperforming Bitcoin potentially by 2 or 3x, right? Even if GameStop's cost basis is 50% higher than today. So I think the GameStop upside has dramatically just grown with the confirmation that this kind of Bitcoin talk with Michael Saylor is no longer rumor, but they're taking actionable steps to it. I think that's the first takeaway. Second takeaway, this, if that were to happen, would be a massive social media narrative and catalyst bringing retail attention back to Bitcoin. That's super exciting, right? How many millions, if not tens of millions, or if not hundreds of millions of people heard about the GameStop saga back in 2021, right? And if GameStop does do this, and if they have new all-time highs, how many media outlets, ignoring Bitcoin, but just for the sake of promoting GameStop again and talking about it because it was a massive media story a few years ago, right? So why not talk about it again? I think it's something that's going to bring a lot of retail interest back to Bitcoin. It's something very noticeable, both myself and for a lot of you watching. Retail interest just isn't back in Bitcoin yet. In fact, retail interest hasn't made a new all-time high in I believe since 2017. I believe 2017 was the retail interest all-time high for Bitcoin, right? And so potentially, these kinds of meme stocks, Trojan horsing retail into Bitcoin, is potentially a major way we could get retail interest back into Bitcoin, everyday folks, which for me, as long as they're buying underlying Bitcoin, I'm a huge fan of. Thank you, GameStop, for bringing the people back. Takeaway number 3. I believe this is evidence that the altcoin cycle is dying. I know a lot of you watching this still hold on to some allocation of altcoins in some crypto portfolio because you want to outperform Bitcoin. And so you hold Ethereum token or Binance token or Cardano token or XR Poop token or Solana token or whatever Shiba, Doge, stupid token. You know, I get it. A lot of you want to outperform Bitcoin. But my urge to you is to consider this, right? These companies are your new competition. Michael Saylor is your new competition. GameStop is your new competition. And I don't care what you think the cute little adorable narrative is for your little altcoin of doubling Bitcoin's price upside, right? But the reality is that you're getting crushed. Why are you getting crushed? Why do people in altcoins feel like alt season never arrives? It's because alt season's already happening. It's just that Michael Saylor and now GameStop are the ones getting all the monetary premium to themselves, right? Altcoins are in the business of diluting their tokens for the sake of acquiring Bitcoin, right? Including Ethereum, right? That's their entire business model. But guess what? GameStop is probably going to do it better than you. They're higher upside, they're lower risk, they're more regulated, and they have way more meme ability behind them, right? People don't understand some token in some place. Right? People want to buy a meme stock that's going to get them upside against Bitcoin, right? So this is my encouragement. I'm not saying you should exchange your stupid meme coin for a less stupid and gambling investment like GameStop, right? I think you should focus on Bitcoin. I don't invest in any kinds of old world altcoins, and I keep my degen allocation to a very, very small number, right? But I am saying, please, if you are going to be a degenerate gambler that's addicted to speculation because you're lying and deceiving yourself that you're going to outperform Bitcoin, please at least stick to the things that are regulated, that aren't going to rug pull you, and in my opinion, are much better risk-adjusted returns for you, right? So this is my third takeaway. I think this is massive evidence that the altcoin cycle is dying. The more GameStops we get, the more Michael Saylors we get, the harder and harder of a time the altcoins are going to have outperforming Bitcoin. I think the altcoin cycle is declining, right? Takeaway number 4. If you want to gain exposure to the upside of this GameStop saga and GameStop craze 2.0, in my opinion, the safest way to do that without counterparty risk is to have self-custody Bitcoin, right? Like, am I a fan of these kinds of companies issuing securities that are adjacent to Bitcoin? Yeah, sure, right? I'm a huge fan of what Michael Saylor does. I own a good amount of, at least 3, let's say, different kinds of securities that Michael Saylor creates, right? Those are my kinds of altcoins, right? I'm not in the degen altcoins, but the, more regulated altcoins, right? However, you know me as the Bitcoin self-custody guy, the Bitcoin maxi self-custody shill, right? And that is my encouragement. I highly encourage you to focus on self-custody Bitcoin, especially if you have over $10,000 worth of Bitcoin, let alone if you have 100 grand, if not millions of dollars. You should definitely focus on wealth preservation and lowering your risk, which is Bitcoin and self-custody, not increasing your risk. Real quick, by the way, if you want help with that, you can feel free to text the phone number on the screen and I will help you. I don't care if you have half a Bitcoin, 7 Bitcoin, 23 Bitcoin, if you have any amount, even as little as a fifth of a Bitcoin, or if you have hundreds of Bitcoin, it doesn't matter to me. No matter how little you have or no matter how much you have, I'm able to help you. My team of 40 people, the Bitcoin Advisor, is able to help you. We have a combined experience of a third of a millennia, and we're happy to help you. If you have a lot of Bitcoin, let's say tens or hundreds of Bitcoin, we're happy to help you with all the tax, legal, and custody and estate planning questions. And if for somebody that's, starting out or, lower net worth, we're still happy to help you, right? We want everybody to have access. We want everybody to have self-custody that can afford it. So feel free to text the phone number on the screen, share that you're looking to take self-custody of your Bitcoin, because we all remember from the GameStop craze back in 2021, what happens when the market makers don't like the fact that all the retail people are making money and all the people in the suits are losing money, right? They closed the market, they halted trading, and they screwed everybody, right? They went to Robinhood, they had all these backdoor deals, they prevented people from selling. If you want to avoid that kind of stuff, you don't want to own GameStop shares. You don't even want to own MicroStrategy shares. That's coming from somebody that owns MicroStrategy. You want to own the underlying Bitcoin. You don't want to keep it on Coinbase where some hacker can steal it if they steal your phone number and your driver's license. You want to withdraw to self-custody. So feel free to text that phone number that you need help with your Bitcoin self-custody, no matter the amount you have. Share your name, email, and I will help you as soon as I possibly can at helping you do that. But let's get back to our conclusions and takeaways here, right? If you want exposure to the upside, you should avoid the possibility of the market makers from halting trading with your asset, which is why you need self-custody Bitcoin. Here's the other reason why you want self-custody Bitcoin. Sure, you could argue that MicroStrategy and GameStop are going to outperform Bitcoin for a while, and I do think they will, right? As I said, I do own some of these securities, right? However, you have to understand that all of these securities are coming back to chase Bitcoin, right? If you want to have exposure to Tesla's balance sheet, you got to buy Tesla stock. If you want to have exposure to Coinbase's balance sheet, you got to buy Coinbase stock. If you want to have exposure to GameStop or MicroStrategy's balance sheet, you got to buy those underlying securities, right? However, with Bitcoin, you get exposure to all of those companies, right? When you own underlying Bitcoin, all of the monetary premium that Tesla and Optimus and Robotaxi and all Elon's shenanigans, all that stuff, you get all that premium flowing back to you if you're your self-custody Bitcoin, right? Same thing with Coinbase. I'm pretty bearish on Coinbase, but the same thing is still true with them as they're trending down to zero, right? With GameStop, MicroStrategy, when you want to have upside against Bitcoin, you got to centralize and go back, and centralize in your exposure to what you own, right? The security. But if you own Bitcoin, if you own underlying Bitcoin, what happens is that you get a diversification to all the meme stocks simultaneously, right? You can think of Bitcoin as like a kind of S&P 500 index of all the meme coins, right? And oh, by the way, also of the nation states, right? If you buy Bitcoin, you're getting exposure to all the nation states and all the meme coins at once. You're getting the security of the money printers of the world, and you're getting the upside of all the meme coins in the world. So not only do I highly encourage you to take self-custody Bitcoin because you're lowering risk, but also because I think the upside in the very long term is significantly higher, right? Why? Because I believe Bitcoin volatility is going to continue to transform from the kind of boom bust cycle we've seen over the last 15 years and transition into a new stair-step kind of Bitcoin cycle, right? Yeah, sure, we just had a 28% correction in Bitcoin price, but I think the days of Bitcoin crashing 94, 89, or 75%, I think those days are rapidly fleeting, if not already gone. I think what's going to happen in the future is we're going to see, yeah, sure, 20, 30, 40, maybe even 60% corrections again, right? So do be prepared for Bitcoin downside and Bitcoin chop for 6 months to 18 months at a time. However, I think the kind of retail FOMO, ICO, crazy up move and then crazy down move, I think that kind of thing is going to transition towards these kinds of legal altcoins, these kind of registered altcoins, right? I think the 90% drawdowns are going to be in the things like MicroStrategy, all their securities, and GameStop and all their securities. I think Bitcoin is going to, have diminishing returns to the upside and diminishing volatility on the downside, right? However, you're still getting exposure to all these companies adopting Bitcoin, right? So I expect Bitcoin volatility to transform, and I expect these kinds of companies are going to replace the altcoins as being outperforming Bitcoin on the way up and then underperforming on the way down, right? I fully expect GameStop and MicroStrategy to outperform Bitcoin as long as Bitcoin's going up, but I do think that if Bitcoin has a 50 to 60% correction in the future, which I do think is possible, even though I think 4-year, bear markets are slowly fading away, I fully expect these kinds of securities to fall 80, if not 90, or even 95%. Which is why they're a short-term trade or short-term G-Gen speculation kind of thing, and not your long-term wealth savings. Your long-term wealth savings, you want to hold in self-custody for your great-grandkids. Your short-term stuff you're going to play with should be a very small percentage of your exposure, and if you're going to have that kind of exposure, you should at least be in the things that have upside, right? So even if, like me, you're going to have some small portion of your portfolio here being these kinds of things trying to quote unquote outperform Bitcoin, you got to keep in mind you got to be smart enough not to be in the unregistered securities, right? The XR Poops and the Shibas and the Doges of the world that aren't going to have the kinds of number go up catalysts that these kinds of companies have, right? So, in summary, this kind of demand from GameStop, I think, is going to be a Trojan horse for retail, in the same way that Howard Lutnick and Michael Saylor are having bit bonds, right? Sovereign debt backed by Bitcoin being the Trojan horse for the U.S. government. I think we'll be looking at a very similar thing with GameStop being the Trojan horse for retail markets again, right? A lot of people right now have very low retail interest in Bitcoin, right? Even though Bitcoin is going up and it still remains the best performing commodity in the world, right? A lot of people at retail just aren't interested because they feel like they're too late and they feel like the Bitcoin's already run. They feel like they missed the boat, right? Which of course we all know is not true, but most people aren't nerdy or obsessed like you and I are, right? And so most people are going to be duped into buying these kinds of securities because they think that they have some sort of information asymmetric edge against the rest of the market, right? So I do think a lot of people are going to get wrecked in GameStop if and when Bitcoin falls 30 to 50% again, and the stock falls, respectively, 70 to 90%, right? So people will make a lot of money on the way up, people will lose a lot of money on the way down, but I think this is going to be what suckers in the retail again because of the unit bias and anchoring bias, right? People have a way different perspective when it comes to these things, and logical or not, I'm just predicting what I think people will do. Not that I necessarily like it or not. I don't like it, but I do think it will happen. I do think it's inevitable. And of course, as I always say, we have less in common with the near future than the past, right? The near future, the altcoins of the future are going to be these kinds of registered securities from these tiny, zombie, forgotten, overlooked, overshorted kinds of companies out there, right? The MicroStrategy and the GameStop's of the world, right? The old era, the old days of, the utility tokens or the alternate proof of chain, proof of work or proof of stake, whatever tokens, right? Those days are falling and fading away quickly, which is why I would highly encourage you, if you still own some of these unregistered securities and tokens, highly consider exiting them immediately, right? Because these kinds of new securities are going to crush the market competition for those, right? And likewise with Bitcoin never go up catalysts, right? Imagine what happens if GameStop actually does have this $26 billion opportunity capitalized for them. That's going to be billions and billions of dollars directly flowing back into Bitcoin from their balance sheet, and potentially tens of billions of dollars flowing back in from retail. We have less in common with the near future narratives for Bitcoin than the past. We have less in common with the altcoins of the future than the past. And of course, Bitcoin price has less in common with the near future than the past. I think if Bitcoin hits $200,000 later this year, that is quite literally more price appreciation in the next 12 months than the previous 12 years, previous 15 years, right? So in every aspect of the sense, we have less in common with the near future and the past. So GameStop, I salute you, encourage you to pump it. We like the stock. Now, some clarification. Personally, I'm not going to be buying GameStop stock yet. Why? It's because I am comfortable with my exposure and being a degen with a small percentage of my portfolio to a variety of, a handful of different MicroStrategy securities. I do think, frankly, that MicroStrategy is higher upside than GameStop, right? Sure, GameStop may have a good amount of upside, right? I do think GameStop probably has the lows in right now because I think they're going to adopt Bitcoin. So just because I'm optimistic on it does not mean I'm buying it, and I'm not encouraging you all to buy it. You got to do your own research. You got to figure out what you're going to do. For me personally, I'm a big fan of minimizing risk, right? That's why I talk all the time about self-custodying your Bitcoin, right? I'm a big fan of minimizing risk and keeping, my upside bets really well researched and really well thought through. And for me personally, while I'm really excited about the rumors for GameStop and the possibilities GameStop's going to have, I need to see more proof. I need to see a longer-term strategy. I need to see more of exactly what they're going to do. Again, don't get me wrong. I think the stock's going to probably at least 5x now because of this kind of announcement and assuming they follow through. But for me, I'd rather own Bitcoin in self-custody. And for the kind of degen stuff I'd have, I'd rather have MicroStrategy and a couple other securities associated with that. So hopefully this presentation has been of use to you. Right? If you need to get out of exchanges, like I said, please reach out as soon as possible. This is really, really urgent. Why? Because when the media attention returns, when the GameStops and MicroStrategy of the world are making all kinds of new massive media headlines, guess what's going to happen? The scammers are going to abound, right? I hear this message from all the time. Luke, why do I need to get off of exchanges, right? No scammers ever stolen my Bitcoin. Yeah, I understand that all they need to do is steal my name, email, driver's license, SIM card, swap me, and then they stole all of my Bitcoin. But you have to understand, we have less in common with the near future than the past. Like I was just saying, the majority of scammers are in front of you. The majority of people willing to steal your Bitcoin are in front of you. Right now, they're too distracted with making boatloads of money, scamming old people in their kind of credit cards and gift card schemes, right? But all the scammers are coming back, and they're coming for your Bitcoin, right? If you have $10,000, $100,000, $1 million worth of Bitcoin just sitting on exchange, defended by your email and password, that is really, really high risk. The single largest risk to your Bitcoin, if you're on an exchange, exchange is not the fact that you have a centralized single point of failure that could be exploited by the government. It is the reality that if Bitcoin does go up and up and up, and kind of like how GameStop did, the market makers, that being your exchange, could potentially halt the upside volatility or halt the ability for you to withdraw from exchanges or buy or sell more, right? That is one of the biggest risks with you having your coins on exchanges. And in my opinion, an even larger risk than that is the probability of somebody stealing your Bitcoin. All they need is a couple key pieces of information. In the same way that they can steal information to log into your bank and, spend on your credit card or whatever, they can do the same thing with your Bitcoin on exchange. The one difference, though, is that you won't get paid back and you won't be able to receive your money back. So please, please, please get off exchanges, right? You can own MicroStrategy and GameStop for the upside on your Bitcoin. Sure, like I said, I already own some altcoins, right? MicroStrategy, being 100% of that base. But remember, all these things trend to one, right? As bullish as you're going to hear Bitcoin people like myself be about GameStop, remember, yes, it will probably outperform Bitcoin for some period of time. It has to outperform so they can keep diluting it, right? But they are in the business of diluting their tokens, diluting their shares, right? Diluting it to get more Bitcoin back. That's their whole business model. So do I think that they're going to zero against Bitcoin? No, right? Real estate, gold, art, non-Bitcoin stocks, those things trend towards zero and definitely over time. Whereas Bitcoin adjacent investments like MicroStrategy, like now GameStop, are probably going to trend back towards one. They'll probably won't trade below their par value against Bitcoin for, very long. It does happen technically here and there. It's already happened with MicroStrategy a few times, but it's very short lasted, right? But in the long term, I fully expect whatever premium MicroStrategy or any other Bitcoin company to have is going to trend back to one, right? A 1x multiple will last a while, but remember, it's going to come back eventually, right? So if you only have MicroStrategy stock and you don't have Bitcoin in self-custody, I think you're being irresponsible. You want to keep your MicroStrategy or any security strategy down to as small as possible in the long term, right? In the short term, maybe you can justify something more if you are firmly confident there's upside against Bitcoin for a while. But remember, all of these companies are altcoins, and they're in the business of diluting shares, right? Fiat premium back into Bitcoin premium. The United States government is going to issue all kinds of bonds to buy Bitcoin. The government is in the business of diluting their own bonds back to buy Bitcoin, right? It's literally the whole fiat standard, right? It's literally the whole petrodollar system. Dilute the underlying accounting system to acquire more real world wealth. It's the same thing with these companies, right? That's just how it goes, right? And I'm not saying that, these things are bad, you shouldn't own them, but I am saying you should understand the risks. And that's why, as a final conclusion here, you should highly, highly recommend you to take self-custody of your Bitcoin. Do it as soon as possible. Information is on the screen right there, and we will see what is the next step for GameStop. Very excited where we go from here. Very excited to see where we go from here, and if they actually capitalize on this $26 billion opportunity. Thank you, everyone, for your time, and I will see you in the next video.